Well, hello and welcome to our first Science Communication Lunch and Learn of the new academic year. I'm Jory Weintraub and I'm the Science Communication Director with Duke University's Initiative for Science and Society, which is the sponsor of the Lunch and Learn series. I hope you all can hear me and the tech is working okay. Sarah, if you can give me a thumbs up in chat, that would be great. So welcome everybody. SciComm Lunch-and-Learn, as some of you may know, is a monthly series in which we explore interesting aspects, at least we hope they're interesting aspects of science communication in an informal science cafe type of format, which means that we generally strive to keep the formal presentation to about a half hour and leave plenty of time for question and answer. So if you do have questions for today's speaker, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will do our best to get to as many questions as we can. I'll introduce our speaker in just a moment, but first I just want to quickly mention that we've got a couple other great lunch and learns lined up for this semester. Next month, we will have Dr. Rob O'Malley from the AAAS DOSER program. That's the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion. And he'll be talking about science engagement with and within faith communities. And in November, we'll have Duke pediatrician, Dr. Richard Chung, talking about the unique challenges of communicating health information to teens. So you can read more about both of those events and RSVP to those events at our website, and we'll put that link in chat right now. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, my colleague and friend, Dr. Jean Goodwin. Jean is a professor of communication at North Carolina State University and a faculty member in the Leadership in Public Science cluster. She's an expert in communicating science to the public and has served as a consultant to the AAAS and Union of Concerned Scientists, among others. She has a bachelor's degree in math, a law degree, and a Ph.D. in communication arts and rhetoric. And over the past summer, Jean organized a reading group on the topic of vaccine communication, which I was really excited to participate in. And despite my best intentions, I only managed to attend the very first meeting. So I'm really interested to hear more about what they learned and discussed over the summer in this reading group, as well as Jean's general insights on the topic of vaccine communication. So Jean, with that, I want to thank you for being here and invite you to take it away.
Great, thank you, Jory. I really appreciate your invitation and all the great work y'all are doing at Duke Science and Society. My own research, my own COVID-inspired research has been on the mask debate, but I do have a long-standing interest in vaccine communication and, as you mentioned, put together a small reading group with my colleague Andy Binder at NC State to explore some recent humanities scholarship in that area. So since I'm a humanist, I'm not here to report experimentally verified effective science communication techniques that are just going to solve this problem. Instead, I want to pose the question of what is the relationship of communication to increasing vaccination rates, share some of my reflections on this, and invite attendees at this workshop to reflect as well. So any discussion of the vaccination issue should really start with the understanding that vaccination is an extraordinarily effective intervention. The US has had high and stable vaccination rates across a variety of vaccines for 20 years now. So it's not just that science has produced great vaccines, although that is definitely the case, as we've seen in the last year. It's also that the social system and individuals' cognitive systems are producing the right decision, resulting in high vaccine coverage. True anti-vax sentiment in the United States is incredibly rare. About 1% of infants through their first round of vaccines, the first 2 years, only about 1% of infants go totally unvaccinated. And even that may be, as the National Immunization Survey results show, may be due to rural status, poverty, or lack of health insurance. How did we get to this better state? positive interactions between the multiple systems that it takes to get people vaccinated. So science, as I said, is producing the vaccines. The social system is distributing those vaccines and spreading the word about the need for vaccination. And then individuals' cognitive systems are processing all that different kind of information and perspectives and producing what are good decisions. So now we're in a different situation, it seems, though. And so here's one of the most common perspectives, I think, about what is this complex, messy situation? What is the trouble that we're in? We have vaccination coverage that we are not satisfied with. Science seems to be sidelined. What's taken over is some kind of social system of like tribalization that's producing misinformation, which is messing up people's normal cognitive processes, so that is encouraging them to make bad decisions. So I think this is a fairly common view in the press and from my talking to people. And what I want to do is take this view apart, look at the individual pieces, and ask whether or not we can really credit this view after thinking about it some. So let's start with the part about cognitive processing of information and decision making. Now, it is definitely true that people have flawed, often very deeply flawed beliefs about the COVID vaccine. Here are 5 myths that the KFF survey has been tracking. This data, the last time they produced this data was in April, so it's a little old, but I don't think the situation has changed all that much. The KFF dashboard is a great source for exploring public opinion on these issues. And I think we've all heard of some of these myths. So who believes these myths? Well, no surprise, a large number of people who say they're definitely not going to get the vaccine credit or are uncertain of at least one of these 5 beliefs. But they're not, that's not all. Actually, sizable chunks of Democrats and even vaccinated people credit or are at least uncertain of one of these myths. There's plenty of other myths that they're not following. For instance, there seems to be a societal consensus emerging that the Pfizer vaccine is better than the Moderna vaccine and way, way better than the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That is tenuously supported, that belief is tenuously supported by science. So faulty beliefs about vaccines seem to be widely held, both by people that are enthusiastic about vaccines and also by people that are not enthusiastic about vaccines. And why is this? Why is it? It's because vaccines are really, really complicated, and we don't have our beliefs in isolation. It's been known for a long time through a variety of different scholarly programs that actually our mental context is pretty tightly organized, that we have mental models of different areas of activity, and we apply those mental models in making decisions. So it's not isolated beliefs. I don't like somebody doesn't tell me something and I run through the logic. Instead, I see if it fits into my mental model. Now, here's what an expert mental model looks like of why normal child vaccination is a good idea and should be pursued. So this is based on work by Fishoff and others about 15 years ago. They asked a bunch of public health experts, they elicited the mental model. Notice that this is a vastly oversimplified mental model because each one of those little boxes could be opened up and just increasingly complex beliefs are hidden inside each of those black boxes. Now let's compare a normal person and a non-expert's mental model, like me maybe, okay, because I'm not a public health expert. My mental model is characterized by large areas of ignorance. I just have never been exposed to those things at all. Also, there's things that are true that for some reason I don't personally believe. And then there's things that are false, errors, that actually are in my mental model. So my mental model is a big mess. And that is pretty typical. I'm not any different than anybody else. What happens here, a new piece of information comes in, could be true, it could be false. My main goal is to see how it fits whether I can make connections between it, where I can squeeze it into my existing mental model and make it fit. If it fits, great, I accept it. If it doesn't fit, then that's going to eventually force me to revolutionize my mental model, but that's a lot of work and I'm going to put that off for as long as possible. All right, so faulty beliefs about vaccination are the norm. That is the normal human state. All non-experts have largely faulty beliefs about vaccination and about every other scientific subject. Now, we could go out and improve our expertise, but it's impossible to become an expert in everything that science offers. Even scientists aren't expert in all of science. And so this is just something we're going to have to live with. Notice that confronts us with a basic asymmetry. We only seem to be worried about faulty beliefs when they are held by people that aren't vaccinating. We let the people that are vaccinating off the hook. Maybe they're getting vaccinated because they have faulty beliefs, or more likely, even that they're getting vaccinated, even though they kind of credit some of these faulty beliefs, but they get vaccinated anyways. I can say that that's true of me. I am a relatively privileged person. I have the education, access to information, and time and interest to explore these issues in detail. Nevertheless, I don't think I could say more than about 2 sentences about mRNA vaccines, something that I don't even pronounce correctly very often, without running into really serious problems. And my minimum understanding of these vaccines, plus my also very marginal understanding of how our immune systems work, actually leads me to have some significant doubts about possible autoimmune side effects. I'm not going to say them because I have no interest in spreading what is clearly misinformation. What protects me against these faulty beliefs that I have? Well, one is epistemic modesty. Like, I know I don't know. I am not an expert. And the second is, what do I substitute for knowledge? I substitute trust. Trust is the theme of many recent humanistic and qualitative social scientific works on vaccination, in particular, a series of books that we read over the last summer. That trust is central to, much more so than information, is central to people's decisions to get vaccinated. Who do we have to trust? Well, we have to trust the FDA in this to certify that the vaccine is safe, the CDC to track the general population health and the transmission of disease and give us good advice, various administrative officials, including for me, my university administration, to deliver these vaccines to us in a way that's accessible and doesn't corrupt the vaccine in some way. We have to trust big pharma to produce the vaccine without serious problems, the medical establishment to deliver it. Larger background trust is in government, like in the party system and the government that's running all of these agencies, the healthcare system, including insurance companies that kind of make this big pharma and medicine system work. And finally, in the very background, trust in the basic fairness of society. That is, that the way we've set things up is a way that cares about me, takes my concerns and interests into account, and that I have a voice in. All right, I think we all should look at this set of trusts that we need to have to get vaccinated and recognize that practically all of us, I suspect, have in the last decade or so had major reasons to distrust, major and to us apparently legitimate reasons to distrust one or more of these institutions. The FDA, there's plenty of evidence that they're in the pocket of big pharma. Big pharma is in some cases become a drug pusher, killing thousands of Americans and addicting others to opioids. The party system, we may not dislike the party system, but think about the other party and how much you trust them. The healthcare system, which seems to be more focused on producing dollars through tests and prescriptions than it is actually producing health and health care for me. And then an overall social system that seems increasingly divided between haves and have-nots, ins and outs, privileged and disadvantaged people. I mean, I think all of us have had some of those thoughts. And those are the thoughts that could lead to skepticism about taking the vaccine. So in other words, the COVID vaccination landed right in the middle of declining trust in our society and major institution that's been well documented across most major institutions. Americans report significantly less confidence. There are a couple of exceptions. Guess what? Science is one of them, and the military is another. So basically, the COVID vaccine landed at a bad time for us, but we're not alone. Vaccines constantly are landing at bad times for us, for societies. Heidi Larson's book, Stuck, usefully chronicles dozens of debates across the world where vaccination campaigns have gone awry because of local tensions and distrust and conflict. For example, in 1995, the Catholic Church in Argentina started claiming that the tetanus vaccine was associated with sterilizing people. So obviously a wedge issue in a society figuring out what to do with their Catholic heritage. That same rumor turns up again associated with Catholic bishops in 2014 in Kenya. 2003, a massive polio campaign is shut down in northern Nigeria due to political tensions between the North and the South, complicated by the fact that the North is a largely Muslim area and the South is largely Christian. 2019, polio vaccination is again become problematic, this time in India, where the Muslim community sees polio vaccination as an attempt to sterilize them. And then longstanding issues in Afghanistan, Pakistan, over the sense that vaccination campaigns are brought in by the same international people that are bombing them. Made worse by the fact that the CIA actually did pretend to be vaccinators in order to catch bin Laden. All right, so trust issues, we're not unique in having trust issues, but we should also be aware that it's not just trust issues that are driving failure to achieve very high rates of vaccination coverage. And I think the way to see this is to look back to an era when the trust issue was less prominent and see what kinds of challenges they had with vaccination. So I'm going to take a quick detour to the history of vaccination and look at polio vaccine in the United States. Now, we're talking about the mid-50s. So polio vaccine was approved in 1955. We think of that as an era when trust in authority, and in particularly trust in doctors, was very, very high. The vaccine had elite support. There was little hints of possible politicization, that this would be socialized a wedge for socialized medicine, but that pretty much national leaders of all stripes went out and said vaccination is great. The vaccine inherited a network of hundreds of thousands of grassroots activists associated with what's now called the March of Dimes, who had been pressing for this vaccine for years and were very enthusiastic. And finally, another reason they could possibly go really fast is because they didn't have the clarity that we now have about informed consent. The early vaccines and the materials, with the human tissue materials with which vaccines were made, were tested on incarcerated people, institutionalized children, people dying of cancer, and then finally hundreds of thousands of school children, with, in some cases with no consent, and in other cases with not very informed consent. That allowed them to go through the kids' approval process for showing safety and efficacy in children quite fast, in under a year, which is going to be faster than we managed to do it. All right, they should have been able to vaccinate fast, right? Well, it actually took them 3 years after they solved supply problems. So approval in 55, supply problems largely solved by their own reports in around 57. They did not reach 90% vaccination coverage among the target population, like school age kids, the original target, for until 3 years later. And then adults were still lagging behind, and I don't think they ever got more than 60% of adults until far after polio had been eradicated in the United States in early 70s. they were themselves interested in why aren't people getting vaccinated? So they did a variety of public opinion survey work. They identified some leading demographics, not surprising, racism, what we would now call racism, and poverty played big roles. Men and southern states also were not vaccinated. They did not find much vaccine doubts. So they did not find doubts about safety and efficacy, but they did find varieties of kind of faulty beliefs about the adults aren't really, polio isn't dangerous for adults, adults won't get it. This may have been a side effect of the fact that the entire push was a push for what was called infantile paralysis, and used a lot of images of little kids in braces and in heart and those giant lung machines. So there was an association between, oh, it's just a kid's disease. And then just procrastination, like it was a lower priority, or people were disconnected from the medical system and therefore were not getting it. So there are many, many factors beyond just trust, many social factors beyond trust that can impede the goal of increasing vaccination coverage. Are any of those factors existing now? Well, we can go back to the KFF vaccine monitor. This is the most recent data from August. They should be coming out with new data soon. And yeah, okay, so we see some trust problems here. Republicans are among the lowest group and Democrats are the highest vaccinated group proportionally. But we also see big age disparities and uninsured people. So the least vaccinated group are people without insurance. Do we need to explain that by trust or by tribalism? I don't think so. Here's the most recent, the state of North Carolina is providing some of the data that they're collecting in a useful dashboard that you can take a look at. Here's the data for my county, Wake County. And indeed, I'm happy to report that the elderly, the 75 plus people, we apparently have achieved 100% vaccine coverage. And in the generally old people, we're well above the 90% level. Look at the other end of the age group, and you'll see that like 60% of people, either teenagers and their parents, presumably more or less attached to their parents, but also the ones that are presumably less attached to their parents are not getting vaccinated. And finally, we do have a more than 10 point difference between the blacks and whites in Wake County in terms of vaccination rates. Okay, so overall, I'm suspicious of claims that misinformation or bad communication is a major driver of our failure to achieve the high vaccination coverage that we'd like. Instead, hesitancy seems to be driven by distrust in all the systems that we need to count on to make vaccination work, and that this distrust is widely shared and not owned specifically by people that are against vaccines. And then hesitancy or the failure to vaccinate in general seems also driven by social factors, including structural racism, poverty, and a totally messed up health insurance system. Finally, though, I do want to end by saying, why aren't people vaccinating? Well, maybe one of the ways forward is to talk to them and ask. And in fact, there is a major vaccine intervention, a communication intervention that focuses around just that, just asking. It's called motivational interviewing. And before COVID, it had been emerging as a very promising possibility. It's a labor-intensive intervention. It's not mass mediated. You can't just packet it in a message, send it out on Twitter, and everybody goes, oh, hooray, I now agree with you. Instead, what you do is you show up for a person and you ask them what they think. You ask them in a non-judgmental way. You respect their autonomy as a decision maker. You acknowledge their values. If you're talking to a parent, you acknowledge that their vaccine concerns are driven by their care for their children, something that is admirable. You build on their mental models when asked, when invited to provide information. you provide information that is well known to them. I mean, so instead of starting with the science, you start with what you think is likely their personal experience or their understanding of recent social events, and you build on that. You go in a yes and way, like you say, yes, here's what your mental model is giving you, and furthermore, there's these other things, not no, your mental model is wrong, but here's the right answer that I know and I'm going to tell you. And in general, you try to support their capacity as a decision maker to make the best decision for themselves and their children. There's a bunch of links on both the kind of scientific background of this, write-ups of a write-up in Stat News as to what it feels like, and then very amusingly, there's in the New York Times, Gagneur, the leader of this effort, had developed a chat box that'll walk you through one of these conversations. Okay, so can we just add some messaging to vaccines and solve the problem? I've suggested that is unlikely. Misinformation does not seem to be a major driver of the failure to vaccinate. Instead, is probably a symptom of the failure to vaccinate. Like if you push a person and you ask if it has decided because of other issues not to vaccinate, they're going to come up with some scientific sounding rationale. You eliminate that rationale, you're just going to get another, because it's just self-justification. Just like my own self-justifications, if you ask me why I vaccinated. What can we do? Personally, I'm trying to develop patience and epistemic humility. We can try to be empathetic to the problems that others are having and help them make good decisions in a variety of ways. And we can address some of the societal disparities that are producing vaccination troubles, as well as many, many other troubles. That would be a great long-term goal. Okay, I see I have 2 more minutes, so I'm going to go through the more scandalous point. Maybe you guys will want to talk about this, that I cut out because I wasn't sure I was going to have time. So what else? What other reflections should we be having about the current situation? Well, I started you off by saying that we should, the starting point of all these conversations is that vaccination coverage is high and stable for a long time. In fact, if we go back to combine data that goes back, let's see, 1967, we see that vaccination, that this 90%, 80 to 90% expectation that that's just what we are going to produce as a society goes back to the early 90s, likely as a result of a big federal initiative to press vaccination. An initiative that started under a Republican president and continued under a Democratic president. All right, so, and this initiative seems really successful. We have high and stable vaccination rates. But interestingly, let's see. Interestingly, Hausman's book goes back and looks in not very well organized fashion, but informally at the press coverage of vaccination during this same period. Before like around 2000, vaccine coverage reported it as a normal public issue. Vaccines there was conflicts reported when there was conflicts. The benefits of vaccines were reported, and some of the side effects were reported too. For instance, there was concern after the Gulf War that some of the vaccinations that soldiers had been forced to get were contributing to the post-Gulf War syndrome. Okay, so that was openly discussed. Hausman found, though, that starting around 2000, that is just as we were achieving really high vaccination rates, the press and likely the elites became fascinated by the existence of anti-vaccine sentiment, which had existed. The first anti-vax organizations go back to the early 1900s. As soon as you get vaccine mandates, you get organized anti-vax organizations. But they weren't really extensively covered. Well, that changed around 2000, and in her findings, the stories, when vaccines were covered, the center of the coverage was anti-vax sentiment. So essentially, anti-vax is, we seem to have created for ourselves a crisis of anti-vax a perception that there is a crisis of anti-vax sentiment in the very time when we have high vaccination rates. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that? Do we participate in continuing to spread that? Is the sense that there's an is that a tribal belief of one of the tribes in our society, that there is this opposing anti-vax sentiment that's doing us a lot of damage, and that we need to deal with it, we need to suppress it? That's at least an issue that is raised by Hausman's work. All right, that's a scandalous enough, so I'll stop there, and hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions.
Jean, that was wonderful. So much good information there. Thank you for compiling all that and sharing it with us. And we do have a lot of questions, some of which were submitted in advance and some of which we've been getting in chat. So I'm going to do my best to try to get to all of those. I'm going to start with one that's, I think, a pretty basic question, and you sort of touched on it when you talked about trust. But the question was, is this response to the vaccine unique? Has there not been vaccine hesitancy in previous pandemics? And you talked a bit about that with polio, but to sort of elaborate on that question, it does seem like it's a much bigger issue now than it has been with previous vaccines. So to what do you attribute that? Is it social media? Is it the political climate? Is it bad information that's easily accessible on the internet? Why is this case study different?
I think we have too high expectations about the rate at which an innovation will be accepted by society. In other words, to look back at polio, it took 3 years to get kids vaccinated, right? If you look at us, we have already, our initial target population was older people, and we have met our goal in about 6 months, 6 to 9 months. That's great. Like, do we really expect it to be faster than that? Society-wide is going slower, but we're like, what bar are we, where is the expectation that it should have been faster than this?
So that's a great point. And then just to build on that, do you think the difference then is not the actual rate of uptake of the vaccination, but rather the sort of the easy access to everyone having a voice to be louder about their views because of social media and things like that? I mean, is that the difference then?
Yes, so social media, I'm skeptical that social media has increased kind of extreme views of all kinds, but it has made them more noticeable by everyone else. Like back in the day, I could avoid learning about opinions that I thought were kooky just by walking past the people handing out leaflets. But now they circulate in a public space of the internet where we're all exposed to them all the time. So there's a lot of evidence that would be great. You should have somebody in to talk about it, about all the various distortions of our cognition about estimating social opinion. And there is a lot of evidence that we tend to overestimate extremes. We overestimate the number of people that agree with us. We underestimate the number of people that are moderate. I mean, we're just not very good at the moment. And maybe just, this may be a human characteristic at estimating the lay of the land in terms of public opinion. And that, so therefore we get more upset than we probably should at the existence of minorities. These very extreme minorities who are very certain of things that I find to be not very plausible.
Yeah, no, that's a really excellent point. Thank you for that. So I want to ask another question, and I'm first just going to give a bit of background, which is that I myself have my advanced degree, my PhD is in immunology. So at least in theory, I know more about vaccines than your average bear, right? And yet I'm also, and just as an aside, when I was in graduate school and studying immunology, I never, and that was a long time ago, right? But I never dreamed that I was studying a controversial field of science. So it's been sort of amazing to me to see what this has become. But But, you know, I'm fairly knowledgeable about the immune response, but I'm also generally a pretty non-confrontational person. And so I'm very averse to getting in discussions where hopefully I can inform people if I think that it's going to be turned around on me and someone's going to be aggressive, or they're going to yell at me, or they're going to throw things in my face and say, you know, I read this on the internet and you're an idiot. And so what advice do you have for trying to communicate when people actually have a decent knowledge base, but they may be wary of sort of the animosity that might come up?
Yeah, that's a significant concern. Notice that it's kind of related to what I just said. Like if you don't have a good map, if your map of who's out there in your audience overrates extremism, you're probably going to be a little bit more afraid. So one thing is to realize that that's a small number of people. Most people in your audience want to hear you and are willing to give you a listen. They're somewhere, you know, more or less skeptical, as people should be about of things other people tell them. So first, just try for some reality testing. Second, realize that the moderator, like I'm assuming, let's imagine an oral event, there's varieties of systems that will help you regulate the meeting. Like you're the moderator, you can shut people up. The rest of the people, I've studied things where people shout the extremists down because they just want to hear the talk. There's major disruptive behavior is frowned upon socially. And then finally, this final method that I recommended, the kind of just ask and listen method, is unlikely to produce confrontation. It may produce, because you're not going to fight back. You're not going to argue back.
Right.
You disavow argumentation and you listen, and you ask people, where did you find that out? What did you think about? What other sources? You know, you try to get them to persuade themselves. But
Yeah.
I agree, it's a significant concern for scientists that I'd be happy to talk with people about.
So following up on that, there's a question in chat that gets back to this idea of motivational interviewing. And it's actually from my friend Brianna Povener, who was a former presenter at Lunch-and-Learn. She did one for us last year. And her question is, I see the motivational interviewing paper addressing vaccine hesitancy was published in 2018, pre-COVID. Do you know if this approach has been tried related to COVID vaccines?
Yeah, I haven't read them, but Gagneur has published something on this in COVID. So check it out. Good thought.
And so you haven't read it, so you don't know?
I haven't read it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go back to the pre-submitted question.
I'm ignorant. I like being ignorant.
Well, we can't all keep up with all the literature as well. That's a big challenge as well. There's so much information out there, right? And especially with COVID, it's just impossible. It's drinking from a fire hose to try to keep up with all of it. Here's a really interesting question we got that was pre-submitted. And this is going to change tack a little bit, but getting to the idea of sort of a humanist perspective and an interdisciplinary perspective to this. The question was, who should be in meetings for the CDC or Centers for Disease Control? Who should be in the meetings that about making decisions besides medical doctors? So the question goes on, should it be sociologists, public relations people, economists? Who should be involved in this narrative, this dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that question in the list, and I needed to ask a question back, which is, what decisions do you think the CDC is making? Decisions about the current status of safety and efficacy of vaccines probably don't need social scientists. If the decisions are about how should that information be shared with broader publics, social scientists and even humanities folk should be in the room. And guess what? They actually already are. The CDC has a large initiative on crisis communication. They have great training materials that they have, at least in part, failed to follow. So it's not a lack of expertise. On the other hand, if we're talking about decisions about whether there should be mask mandates, whether there should be vaccination mandates, whether schools should reopen, I don't think the CDC should be making those decisions. We're at the point COVID is not a health, no health decision. I mean, COVID is, it is more or less. We're going to be living with COVID. The human race has now imposed COVID on itself. It's going to be a factor in our future. Even if there's full vaccination, I don't think it's going to be eradicated like we've eradicated one virus, smallpox, right? It's not going to go in that direction anytime soon. So we're in a situation of more or less COVID, and therefore we need to make trade-offs between all the other values that we have. For instance, my value system is that we need to get kids back into schools, and I am willing to trade off some public health to get that. Then a backup question is, how do we make sure to protect as much as possible what we need? What do we need to do? How do we share the risk or compensate the risk that that is going to be taken by getting the kids back physically into schools? You know, those are deliberative decisions. Scientific information has a part to play, but it's definitely not a decision that's given by science. Our political system should help us be making those decisions.
And I don't disagree, but I want to push back just for the sake of discussion. One thing that we hear over and over is we need to follow the science. And so, you know, the science, that's where the CDC comes in, right? They are the experts on science. So, so when you say they shouldn't be making these decisions, shouldn't they be at least informing these decisions? And shouldn't the decision makers be drawing on the science that's coming out of the CDC?
So one slogan that's emerged from some research of scientists' interaction with lay decision makers is science on tap, not on top. So yes, I would hope that we all are trying to find out, increase our awareness of the science relevant to our personal decision makers. And I think that access to scientific information is close to a human right, and that the scientific establishment should be investing much more in making that information available. For example, through Wikipedia, my favorite science communication mechanism. But that's very different than following the science. We shouldn't follow the science. We should follow our core values, and then ask the scientists, get their sense of what are better and worse methods. How do they rate the methods? Ask them to track our progress. Like if we have a goal, let's set up some metrics and see whether we're achieving that goal or not. And if we're not achieving it, then let's go back to the drawing board and rethink. So there's plenty of room for science, but it's not going to be followed.
And to follow up on that, a question that just popped up in chat, and I'll just read it straight from chat, is how about politics, such as governors who remove funding from public schools that defy their no mask rule?
Yeah, as I kind of indicated in the middle of the talk, if trust is the major driver of failure to achieve instant total vaccine coverage, we need to work on trust. But that was apparent before the vaccination, before COVID. We have significant trust issues in our society. It is making our lives worse. Like societies with high levels of trust, justified trust, like earned trust, thrive. People are more happy across many social indicators. So recovering trust in our society, doing the work to rebuild trust, to me, that's very high on my agenda. I totally agree.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I think that's a really excellent point, is that COVID didn't create trust problems, but it certainly has brought them to light, the ones that were already prevalent throughout society. So another pre-submitted question that I think is really interesting, and I'm excited to hear your take on this, is what advice do you have for humanists on connecting with scientists and helping them communicate their science?
Yeah, actually, the same advice I have about everything: patience and epistemic humility and empathy. Scientist-humanist interactions are marred by, I have to say, I'll say mutual misunderstanding, that very often, and this is true for scientists interacting with social scientists as well, when it comes to communication issues, very commonly what people seek from humanities and social science people is a quick fix. Like, here's the message, just tell me what will work. I'll get a group of my students together and you just give them an hour training and that'll help them communicate effectively, and then climate change dissent will disappear. Okay, that's not what we can do. Humanists are good at helping people think about what they are actually doing, ethical issues, side effects, connections, cultural points of view that they may not be thinking of. Social scientists can help them not find the simple fixed truths and truth, but can actually help them think of how complicated it is to communicate effectively. And so there's a mismatch between what we're often sought to do and then what we actually can do or would want to do. Solving that mismatch takes a lot of trust building on both sides. And so it takes a big time investment, both for the humanities faculty, but then also for the science faculty, who need to enter into the conversation with the understanding that some of their views about communication may change.
Yeah.
So
great point. And there was another question that's actually very closely related to that. So I'll read that one next. What forums or outlets have you found, and then in parentheses, or invented, for people from the humanities and sciences to meet and work together? I don't know if you've created any such forum. You did have this working group over the summer to start that conversation, but do you know of other sort of outlets where people from the humanities and the sciences can come together to have a dialogue on this?
Yeah, there's some, the networks that I know of tend to be hyper local. For example, at NC State, there is a strong environmental justice working group that's actually located in our foreign languages department. And then in the communication department, my colleague Andy Binder and I are always on the lookout for more people to get involved in conversations within our own, like set of disciplines, humanities and social sciences. At the national level, there are some, if you're interested, give me an email and I'll follow up. There's a national ethics society that's largely based in philosophy, but that welcomes a lot of different kind of people. Occasionally there's the team science movement and the science ethics movements both have a lot of interaction between the science establishment and various random social scientists and humanists, but there isn't a really stable way of doing this, unfortunately. You should tell me about yours and then I'll learn.
We'll save that for another lunch and learn. So one of the questions that was submitted is actually a question that I literally posed to my science communication course that I'm teaching this semester just yesterday in class. And that is, what is the sort of ethical obligation of scientists to feel that they should play an active role in communicating about, clearing up misperceptions and misunderstandings and misinformation, as opposed to simply being scientists and focusing on doing their research and publishing? Like, where do you draw that line between ethical obligation and just let me do my science?
Okay, I'm going to tell you my view on this, which is, it's complicated. Okay, I do not think that anyone has an ethical obligation to relieve other people of misunderstandings. We may have an ethical obligation to relieve ourselves of misunderstanding. Scientists collectively have the responsibility to make the fruits of science accessible to the broadest public possible, which means, and that means communication, but it's not communication to address misunderstanding, it's communication to support exploration and good decision-making. So it can be very passive forms, like my fave, Wikipedia. It can be, improving STEM education start at the undergraduate level. There's all sorts of ways to make sure that every person in the world who has a bit of curiosity can follow that curiosity as far as it takes them. That's responsibility of scientists as a whole. Individual scientists don't have that total responsibility, although it'd be great if they at least gave moral support to that effort and applauded other scientists for doing it. But not every scientist has to do it. It's a group or collective responsibility.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to read another question that was put in chat. I'm just going to read straight from the chat here. What are your thoughts about whether vaccine mandates for example, regarding entry to public places, air travel, et cetera, would exacerbate the tribal objections, or would they be ultimately effective in convincing people that to participate in society, they need to get vaccinated?
Yeah, I think that's a key question. Vaccine mandates, mask mandates at every level, you know, federal, covering everybody down to my university or my department, whatever. I don't think anybody is going to be able to say, this is something that we need to deliberate on. We share the goal of decreasing infections and increasing vaccine coverage. What is the best means to that goal? Mandates may be an effective means, or mandates can produce pushback to the point where there's even more disobedience. Like once, I mean, Aristotle pointed this out, if you pass a law that people really don't like, and they'll just disobey it, and that brings the entirety of the law into question, not just that one law. So that's something that we would like to avoid. I don't think I'm any wiser than anybody else. I would like to see some general public deliberations on, okay, these mandates they keep coming out of administrative offices, and I have no sense of, I'm sure that the people are trying hard to make a good decision. I'd rather see our Congress, you know, revive itself a little bit and have a debate about it. Let's explore these kinds of issues more generally.
Yeah,
but it
absolutely.
is, we have to worry about, we want to achieve vaccination. Having a mandate that lowers vaccination is a merely symbolic victory that may make my tribe feel good, but does not actually achieve the purpose that we want to avoid.
Right, absolutely. There's another question that just popped up in chat. It actually sort of gets back to your previous point, but I think it's an interesting, important question, so I'm going to read it off to you. What should we prioritize in our communication with the general public? Scientific facts versus the process of science and scientific inquiry and efficacy? Because, you know, you mentioned this a minute ago, right? We need to do a better job of helping people understand how science works before they can really understand the science we're trying to share with them. But how do you find that balance?
Yeah, I think that is a significant issue that should be worked on by large interdisciplinary. I mean, that's going to take a lot of different perspectives from education, STEM education people, communication people, philosophers. There's a lot of, it's increasingly clear that STEM literacy, which is something that we want all citizens to have in order to be able to participate. And by citizens, I mean everybody that lives here and should have a voice in what we're saying, not necessarily like legal status. STEM literacy is basic to citizenship in contemporary world.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of literacy? Literacy about the process of science, literacy about the social formation of science, like how science is funded, how topics get selected for scientific study, scientific method. We know that it's not just scientific facts, like that the sun is the center of the universe or whatever the standard list of facts that we get tested on. We want something more. Is it even a more critical literacy that examines the limitations of science as a decision making? Maybe it's social science literacy about my own thinking, like how do people think about science? Like if I know that I'm not a very good thinker about science, I might be more hesitant and more trusting of scientists. Like there's a lot of options out there, and that could be an excellent research initiative to try to straighten this up a little bit.
Plenty of work for future grad students to do, right?
Exactly.
Well, we are running low on time. I'm going to ask one more question, and maybe this one is too big of a question to ask with a few minutes left, but I think it's a really interesting question. It was pre-submitted. And the question is as follows: how do we deal with the empathy locality? In other words, the idea that an individual's empathy decreases as distance, diversity, genetic, and other cultural differences increase.
Yeah. Well, you'll notice that the motivational interviewing leverages locality. You go into the person's room. I mean, the setup is that this intervention takes place actually even before birth. or right after birth, you go in the hospital room and you talk to that one person, the interviewer talks to another person. So it leverages people's cognitive tendency to empathize with more present and less with less far. It doesn't bode well for people that want to lean on mass media, though, which is kind of, when people talk about misinformation, they kind of, I think, have a mass media perspective in the back of their mind. They're talking about how messages circulate through major media outlets or on social media. Some of the better initiatives on social media, again, try to leverage locality. So setting up a Facebook group dedicated to serious discussions of vaccine, pro and con, imposing a lot of ground rules that basically silence the people that are really disruptive, and that actually seem to be having some success one at a time in helping people think through and make a good decision on their own. So yeah, I don't have any messages for my mass media colleagues. I think they're in a little bit of trouble. Or another, I mean, if you want to end it with another big issue that I don't have any particular insight on, is how are we going to regulate social media?
Yeah. Who
is going to do it and how are we going to do it? I do have civil liberties concerns about just banishing misinformation. There's slippery slopes there. And I can think of things that I care about a lot that could be subject to the same problem. It's also, so far, it's pretty ineffective. That's a big social issue. I don't have any particular insight, although I'd like to see that on our agenda.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that may be another great topic for a future SciComm Lunch-and-Learn. So unfortunately, we are out of time now, but this has been fantastic. There's been lots of really wonderful conversation in the chat room. We had a great crowd turnout and lots of wonderful information from you, Jean. So I want to thank all of the people who are attending today, and I particularly want to thank you, Dr. Jean Goodwin, for taking your time to share your expertise with us and for this wonderful conversation. Thanks everybody for attending. We've recorded this and we will be sharing it through the Science and Society website. And I want to encourage all of you to check out our website to see more information about upcoming SciComm Lunch-and-Learns. As I said, we've got some great ones lined up this semester, and I'd love to get suggestions from all of you out there on future topics and or speakers for science communication lunch-and-learn sessions. So with that, thanks again, Jean. Have a wonderful day, and to all of you, thanks for being here. And we will see you next month.